The story we're about to discuss has been inspiring outrage across the world and in the country also where it took place. You can find it on our website at cnn.com/world. It's an amazing story. I'll give you a brief synopsis and then we're going to talk to the CNN producer who's been working the story. 75-year-old woman arrested for having two men in her home who happened to be unrelated to her. They were arrested too, but here's the part that's really making people upset. She's been sentenced to 40 lashes and 4 months in prison for having two men, and it wasn't anything unseemly, right? The men say they were delivering bread to her. Can you give us some more details about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. The men say that they were delivering bread, and in fact, one of the men who was arrested says that he is actually a relative, or considered to be a relative to the woman, because basically she acted as a wet nurse to him when he was a baby. And under Saudi and Islamic custom, if somebody does that, then the baby that grows up is considered to be a relative. So, in effect, if that were the case, there would be nothing wrong with it. But because the religious police suspected the man of not being related to her, and because there are male guardianship laws when it comes to women in Saudi Arabia, and you're not allowed from mingling, unrelated men and women mingling in public or private together, they were arrested.
CNN producer Mohammed Jamjoom has been following this story. He's even spoken to the attorney who's going to take this case. So, for a lot of people who live in cultures where women just don't have these kind of restrictions, it's very difficult for them to understand, especially, a woman who's 75 years old to be sentenced to lashing?
Right. This is, unfortunately, this sort of thing, not this particular case, but this sort of thing happens more commonly than you would think in Saudi Arabia. We covered a case in 2007 called the case of the Qatif girl. This was a 19-year-old who was gang raped in the eastern seaboard city of Qatif, and she was found to be with an unrelated male when she was attacked. And the judge sentenced the rapist, but then also sentenced her to 200 lashes and 6 months in prison. And that was unbelievable. There was so much scrutiny put on Saudi Arabia by the international media and by governments because of this case that eventually Saudi King Abdullah pardoned her. But this sort of thing can happen in Saudi Arabia because judges there under Sharia law have wide discretion to rule pretty much however they want to.
Now, it's interesting because there has been more vocal and public opposition and criticism of the way that justice is dealt out there. Can you talk a little bit about what's been happening in the media as well as with the public, where people are sort of tired of this kind of justice that turns a blind eye to reason?
Right. In fact, just the fact that you're seeing this kind of reporting being done, whether it's in an English language paper in Saudi Arabia or an Arabic language paper in Saudi Arabia, that's amazing. This sort of thing, this kind of open criticism of the judiciary and of controversial verdicts that are handed down, this was unheard of a few years back in Saudi Arabia. The rise of the internet, the fact that there are more progressive publications over there that are really pushing the envelope, and that there are so many bloggers, that's why this stuff is getting out there. And oftentimes the people that I speak with say, we want the international media attention. They feel that that will safeguard them from this continuing to happen.
Okay, so you have a king who's wants to be progressive, I understand,
right,
and has been making some changes to his cabinet. What are we seeing happening there?
Well, a few weeks back, actually on Valentine's Day, on February 14th, King Abdullah announced a major cabinet reshuffle. This was the biggest cabinet reshuffle that's happened in probably 20 years in Saudi Arabia. Saudi King Abdullah, he's about 85 by most accounts. He's seen as a reformer, maybe a cautious reformer, but a reformer. And basically what he did is, how it was perceived was out with the old and with the new. Out with a lot of hardliner conservatives, old guard, ministers, and in with new ones. You've had a new minister of health, a new minister of information, and this was interpreted by many in Saudi Arabia as a real overhaul, perhaps even an overhaul of the judiciary, so that things could be streamlined, so that verdicts like this wouldn't come down in the future and give Saudi Arabia a black eye, public relations-wise. But just in the past couple of weeks, even since this was announced, and even since this was hailed in Saudi Arabia as such a big deal and welcomed, there have been cases that have astounded people. There was a case of two Saudi male novelists just last week at a book fair in Riyadh who tried to get the autograph of a Saudi female novelist, a columnist rather. They were arrested for doing so by the religious police.
Just because they wanted her autograph?
Just because it was considered to be improper. But Saudi Arabia is struggling with this. They're having cultural events these days where they're trying to have men and women mix, but there is a presence from the religious police in these places. And if they think that something unseemly is going on, they will act upon that. So
there's been cabinet reshuffling, but there has been no change in the way the religious police operate.
At this point, no. This is seen this isn't being said publicly by the royals, and this isn't being announced in the headlines, but in editorials you will see people suggesting that this is seen as a diminishing of the power of the old guard religious hardline conservatives, including the Commission for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. That's the religious police. And they go around, we even have video that we're showing, they go around, they troll cities, they troll malls, they go around when it's prayer time, and if they see anything that they suspect, they take people, they force them to go pray, they arrest them, they beat them. And there's been a real public outcry in Saudi Arabia the past few years to lessen the power of these individuals.
And they can just go to your home, they can knock on your door and just walk in and say, you know what, something in here is happening, you're breaking the law?
Absolutely. If they've been tipped off, they feel that they have their discretion to do so, and they can do it.
Okay, so in the meantime, maybe change is coming, maybe it's not, or maybe it's coming very slowly. Let's get back to the specifics of this case. You have spoken to an attorney who's very well known, who is going to be taking this woman's case?
Yeah, Abdurrahman al-Lahim is the name of the attorney. Now, he is the top human rights lawyer in Saudi Arabia. Coincidentally, he also represented the Qatif girl, who we talked about earlier.
Right, that was back in December
2007, correct. And he's really good at getting these cases out there to the media for people to see, and also gaining publicity, but really standing up for the human rights of people who he feels have been abused. He's volunteering his services in this case. He's going to be representing the woman and the two men, and he's going to the Saudi city of Ha'il, where this is taking place next week, to file paperwork. He now has their powers of attorney. So this probably will garner a lot more play in the Saudi press in the coming months, and we'll see what happens with it.
It seems like a no-brainer. I mean, doesn't it seem as though once the facts are all out, that they will see that, you know, it's a 75-year-old woman, and if they can prove that she acted as a wet nurse, because under law there, that would mean that they were related in some way, and then they wouldn't be breaking the law. She wouldn't have been with a man who was unrelated to her.
Absolutely. The initial media report of this, which was in Al Watan newspaper, which is one of the more progressive dailies over there in Saudi Arabia, said that she had claimed, and the male had claimed, that they were related under this idea that because she was his wet nurse, but that the judge took into consideration testimony by the religious police, and we assume that means the religious policeman who arrested them, and ruled that it was not proven that this man was her son. And because, now I will say that if it had been ruled that he was her son through this idea, and there were somebody else in his presence, that probably means everything would have been fine, because he would have acted as her male guardian. At least that's what we assume. But because they say they're unrelated, they're mingling in private, big no-no, and the arrests were made.
Right, and in the meantime, she's being held, but it's unlikely that until there's an appeal that any lashes would be doled out, that she would be suffering in that way.
That's right. It's basically a 2 or 3 step process depending on the case. But in a case like this, the verdict was finally issued. Then she would have anywhere from 30 to 90 days to appeal that verdict. That's what's going to happen now, and we have confirmed through the lawyer that he is going to do that. Now, if that period were to pass and they didn't contest it in some way, then it would go to another court, the procedural court, and basically the sentencing or the planning for the sentencing would be carried out. But because we now know there will be an appeal, it will at least we'll have to find out if the appeal will be accepted, and then what happens after that, and if any of the royals or the king intercedes on their behalf. I mean, it's not unheard of that if it's this big of a deal that they would, you know, so that the case would be out of the public eye.
Mohammed Jamjoom, thank you so much. You've been covering the story. I know you'll keep us posted as to what happens next. You should check out Mohammed's article at cnn.com/world. It's a really fascinating look at a country that is struggling with its culture and how to move forward.